Hello, everybody. I have the unwelcome task of substituting for my boss, Dean Bartles, who I think was here for the last couple of days, but because of prior travel and some confusion about the schedule, he had to leave early. So he called me last night and said, get down to Orlando and deliver some remarks. I'm going to deviate from what he was going to talk about and just tell you straight out what this is all about. I think probably most of you have not yet heard of the Advanced Robotics Manufacturing Institute based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because it just happened on January 9th. It's literally 3 weeks old. I don't have business cards. I've been apologizing during the day for not even having cards yet. We are one of 14 institutes that were established through January 9th during the Obama administration. A lot of you may have heard some of this history. Forgive me if I repeat stuff you know. But essentially, going back to 2011 and 2012, the administration looked at the manufacturing sector and they recognized what most of you recognize, which was the manufacturing sector in the United States was in steep decline. Manufacturing jobs were down, manufacturing companies were down, the balance of trade was tilted over to Asia, and there was a perception that the whole sector was going under. The administration asked some of its gray beards and wise fellows to come up with recommendations as to what can the United States do to save the manufacturing sector. And the leading recommendation that was submitted about 2012 was that the United States government should take a serious position and should identify individual aspects of American manufacturing that had the potential for us to become dominant once again. We may have lost our edge, we may no longer be the leader in certain niches, but the theory was that if the federal government plows money into an individual institute, empowers that institute to attract the best brains in the country on that particular niche, both from industry, those who are working in that niche, and from academia who are studying and researching that niche, and brought those people together with federal money that would leverage private money on top of it, that we could create centers of excellence in different parts of the country. And those centers of excellence, if they played their cards right and if they charted an appropriate course of research and development, and if the R&D projects that they funded were successful, that the United States could reclaim the lead in those individual niches. The very first one of them, as many of you may know this, the very first one was called America Makes and was started in 2013, I believe, 2012 or 2013 in Ohio. And today is, one of the leading centers in the U.S. on additive manufacturing, 3D printing. I was affiliated with the second one. The second one is an organization that many of you will know, and that was the Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute that Dean Bartles was the executive director of. I was the membership director there in Chicago for about 2 or 2.5 years. And so it's a really nice opportunity for me and Dean and some other people who were in Chicago now are in Pittsburgh helping the 14th of these institutes. Essentially, each one of them operates in the same general way, but I'll tailor my talk to the most recent one that we have. The Advanced Robotics Manufacturing, known as ARM, A-R-M, Institute in Pittsburgh, essentially has 3 missions. They all have these 3 missions, but I'll tell you about our missions. Essentially, number 1 mission is to identify where are we in the technology right today? What are the obstacles and what are the gaps and limitations in the field of robotics in manufacturing? Our institute is not focused on robotics across the board. We're not interested, or we're not focused on robotics that you would see out in a field or an agricultural setting. We're not interested in robotics as it might help to care for your grandmother in a nursing home. We're not interested in robotics that would clean the floors of your living room. Our interest is in robotics as used in a factory to produce things. And the goal of the Institute, in a nutshell, is to be able to develop the research and push the state of robotics in the United States so that robots can become cheaper, faster to deploy, more safe, and more cost-effective. All with the notion of creating, and Dick alluded to this, the notion of creating collaborative robots, smaller, faster, easier to deploy robots that would make sense to deploy across the United States in smaller factories. Today, as most of you probably know, these big robots that you see on the various screens typically are being deployed by major multi-billion-dollar multinational companies. Maybe it's the automobile companies, maybe it's the aerospace companies, but you don't see many robots in small and medium-sized enterprises. If the theory is that robots can make companies more competitive, then the application of that theory is, all right, let's make these robots faster, cheaper, easier to produce, and more cost-effective so that small businesses and medium-sized businesses throughout the United States can say that it makes sense and they'll start deploying them. It brings up an interesting issue which comes up in every conversation I have, which is, what do we want robots for? It's just going to lay off more people, and if unemployment will continue to rise, and it'll only hurt the country. It's not going to help the country. Our own view, and the view of many experts who look at the field of automation and robotics, is that while the introduction of robots on a factory setting in the short run may very well lay off people, the idea, is to put in a robot so that so a human being doesn't have to lift or cut or carry in a repetitive fashion certain tasks. But research has demonstrated that when you introduce robots into a business enterprise, it often makes the enterprise much more cost competitive. That makes them able to compete with low-wage countries, and has a significant chance of bringing more business to that company, making it grow, and ultimately increasing jobs. Not only the jobs that are directly related to robotics, the guys and gals who have to design new robots and build them and maintain them and service them. So the whole robotic sphere is going to become a huge growing market. But you also have the collateral benefit of just companies growing. So now you need more salespeople, you need more accountants, you need more safety workers, you need everybody if the economy grows. There is the perception out there, I share it, I'm championing this perception, that this field is coming, like it or not, it's coming. And the question for the United States is, can we harness our brains and pull ourselves together so that every robot that ends up in the US factory isn't made in China or in Korea or in Singapore, but that the robots themselves are designed and manufactured here in the United States. So the benefits of being key players in the robotics industry and the benefits of deploying robots and making your companies more successful are the two thrust areas for the Institute in general. And that's open to debate, and when the questions come, feel free to challenge me. Let's see if we can actually get a discussion on that point. So the three missions of the Institute. Now I'll go, give me a high sign when I'm done, okay? Okay, the three missions of the Institute, like all the institutes, is essentially this. Number one, we're the folks who are being charged with, by the federal government, not charged, but given the responsibility by the federal government to chart the course for that R&D program throughout the United States. We do that by calling together technology representatives from our member companies. We now have about 130 signed letters of endorsement from 130 major and smaller businesses in the United States that were behind the effort to win this proposal. They have not yet signed the membership agreement. That's my job. We've got to make that happen in the next few months once we have a membership agreement. But our mission is to pull together the best brains in the United States to develop what we call a technology roadmap, which is essentially the identification of what needs to be done. Then to issue solicitations for specific projects that fall out of that technology roadmap, to which our members, both academic and industry members, can form teams among themselves. So we might have Intel joining forces with Siemens, with a small business, with a software house, and with 2 university professors. That's the Intel team, competing for the same solicitation against 3, 4, 5, 6 other teams. Our institute evaluates the technology proposals, determines which, if any, are worthwhile to fund, and those that we fund with 50% of the money of the project, so that hypothetically, if Intel was to submit a white paper to us to do a certain project, and they said, this costs $2 million and it'll take 2 years of research. The way these institutes operate is, we're given money by the federal government. In our case, we're being allocated $80 million to spend over 5 years, after which we have to become self-sufficient. But we have $80 million to spend on pushing the robotics field forward. Most of that $80 million will, in fact, be plowed into the R&D projects. Maybe 70 million out of the 80 million will be spent for the purpose I'm now describing. But on an individual project, we get the project from Intel, we say, this is a great idea, let's do it. We'll negotiate with Intel a prime contract. Intel will negotiate separate subcontracts with all of its team members. We'll come up with 50% of that $2 million or $1 million bucks, and the team itself, the Intel team, has to come in with what we call cost share. Essentially, they got to come up with the other 50% of the value of the project. So the theory or the beauty of this world of these institutes is that from the government perspective, they put in 50% of the money, but they leverage or induce the private sector to come in with the other 50% of the money. So they're basically doubling the horsepower of the federal investment. And then on the flip side, on the industry side, it's similarly attractive because a company like General Motors or Amazon or Lockheed Martin or whoever who's going to run an independent R&D program in any case, if they can help shape the influence of our R&D program and only have to come in with 50% of the value of the research that they would otherwise perform anyway, they get 50% of the money from the federal government. So the point is, it's a win-win for the federal government and the members of our institute who perform it. The second mission of our organization, as given to us by the U.S. Army, which is the contractual party that was signed into this deal. The U.S. Army dealt with the leader of our consortium proposal, which was Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. They were the head of this gigantic team that they pulled together. And so the two signatories to the actual contract is the U.S. Army and a nonprofit organization spun out of Carnegie Mellon University called American Robotics, of which our beloved Dean Bartles is the CEO. So Dean is the CEO of American Robotics, which is a nonprofit, and he's the executive director of this institute, which operates under American Robotics. The second mission that we have, and let's just go through these two missions, then I'll wrap up. The second mission that we have is once we develop the insights from the R&D projects themselves, and this happens over a period of years, we have the mission to disseminate this intellectual property out to hundreds of thousands of factories across the United States. If the problem, as I told you, is that not enough of these robots are being deployed in small and medium-sized enterprises, we have the task of figuring out how the hell do you get the attention of people who are running small businesses who have lots more things on their mind than adding robots, but to demonstrate to them that the field has moved forward, it is to their advantage to pay attention, they will become more competitive if they use it, and it's going to overall lead to the benefits for society. So that whole dissemination mission is the second mission. And the third mission given to us by the U.S. Army is to develop the workforce development plan. We're not going to do it all ourselves, but the workforce development plan on how do you train the workers of the future in the United States to be ready to handle these robotic jobs that are emerging. Today, there's a shortage of these sorts of people, and as the field grows and grows and grows, there's going to be a huge shortage. So we're the folks who have to call together our members, again, the members from big industry, the members from small industry, the members from academia, at the community college level, at the university level, at the trade school level, bring them all together into what we call a workforce advisory committee and chart a course that determines what type of curriculum, what do you actually have to teach people to make them able to work in the robotics field? What type of curriculum delivered in what type of format? Is it face-to-face learning in a classroom? Is it video training? Is it these MOOCs, these massive online open courses that you probably see, which are very inexpensive and delivered via the internet? So we have to figure that one out and then figure out what's appropriate at which level of education. What do you have to, how do you train high school students, community college students, university students, and workers on the factory floor? That's our third mission, and that's a huge one. And we saw each of these three missions at the Digital Institute in Chicago, and each one is a challenge, but if you can, here's the closing line. This is the upbeat closing. And that is, these are not impossible challenges. These are just challenges that require the United States basically to get its act together. You know, we've been losing for 2 or 3 or 4 decades in the competition to be excellent manufacturers around the world. We took it for granted that, well, this is the United States. We know more about this than anybody, while basically countries were eating our lunch. And so these institutes, and I won't go through the 14 of them, I'll rattle off a few just for the fun of it. There's institutes that are now on digital manufacturing. There are institutes on lightweight metals. There are institutes on sexy new textiles. There's institutes on fancy batteries and energy sources. There's one on photonics in New York State. There's one on flexible circuits, so a circuit board can be bent like a piece of rubber. There's all kinds of cool stuff. The point is that the country has made a decision that if we really get our act together and pull the best brains together and invest real money, this can succeed. Most people who've looked at the results of the research thus far are optimistic, but it's truly too early. In the case of DMDII, where I worked, you got projects that are still underway. It's only been a year or 2 years since they got set up. It's certainly too early for the Robotics Center where I am now located. And here's the closing. Anybody in this room who is affiliated in any way with robotics, maybe you make them, maybe you design them, maybe you use them, maybe you test them, maybe you deploy them in your factory, maybe you've thought about deploying them in the factory, but you haven't figured out the cost, the economics of it. The folks in this room are precisely the sort of folks representing the companies that you represent who should become members of the ARM Institute. I would love to hear from you. I'm going to click right to the end so you can see Dean's, I think we have Dean's email, and then I will give you mine. Maybe you don't, no. I was just trying to go to the last slide of Dean's presentation. Pardon me? So have we lost it? Okay, forget about it. Anyway, reach out to me or the ARM Institute, Advanced Robotics Manufacturing Institute in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We'd love to talk to you, and together we can help rebuild the U.S. manufacturing sector. Thank you.